This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And on today's show, we're going to be talking with Kimberly Dakin. And one of the things that many of us think as we wake up every morning, yeah, I know exactly what I'm going to do today. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to shower. I'm going to get dressed. I'm going to have my coffee, step by step. And some days that really works for us. But you know what? Most days, something throws us a wrench. And sometimes that wrench that is thrown to us can last more than a day. Sometimes it can last days, weeks, months, even years. But Kimberly has said that she knows how to pivot. And that's a word that we've just started really using in our everyday language. So welcome, Kimberly, and give us a little bit of background.
Oh, thank you, Karen. Yeah, I have kind of a patchwork quilt background. I was in performing arts for quite some time, and then I moved from New York City to Maine, which was a planetary pivot in my experience. And that was, I guess, about 30 years ago now. And I have since come to understand that a background in the arts in general and improvisation in particular really helps in times where we are called on to make change. Personally, in our relationships, professionally, even as a culture. And I think a lot of those necessary changes are calling to us now from all kinds of places. And during the pandemic, it became palpable for a lot of us, putting ourselves on the hamster wheel. I have a master's degree in adult education, and I run my own business that's focused on training. And within the matter of a couple of weeks, all of my in-person trainings dried up, and I was looking at a really nice, profitable year. Whoop, they all evaporated. So I've learned not to spend a long time in blame and fear. Who are you going to blame when it's a worldwide pandemic?
Right, exactly.
Right? It's craziness. So I thought there's got to be a gift in this. And as it comes, I came to realize that the gift was time. Suddenly, I couldn't, suddenly all these things that I had committed myself to were no longer there. So I had a span of time, unstructured time in front of me for maybe the first time in my life. So I thought, wow, this is an opportunity. So I cut all my expenses. I went back to kind of my ramen noodle days.
I remember those days.
Right. And I started writing a book. I took on Seth Godin's writing a community program, the promise of which is at the end of 6 months, if you just commit to writing 15 minutes a day, at the end of 6 months, you will have at least an ebook that you can publish. So that sounded good to me.
Sure.
So I took that on, and I was searching around for topics. And somebody suggested you should write a book on what you teach workshops about. And one of the most interesting and I believe impactful topics that I do workshops on are listening, how we listen, what we listen for. And I'd broken it down into head, hands, and heart listening, which some people might recognize as whole body listening. It was a model that was introduced in the Waldorf School for early childhood education, but it hasn't been applied to adult learning or adult professional interactions. So I took that on and I wrote what I thought was a book. It was a short book, it was an ebook, but lo and behold, I got a publisher. Uh, and this publisher demanded that the book be 3 times as long as it was. So suddenly I had to pivot again. And this time I had to pivot more deeply into my subject matter and my own experience. And I have to say that just writing this book um, has been such a journey of discovery for me, tying in so many of my own experiences, my experiences with clients, my experiences in my trainings, that I have to say that I, for the most part, and this is not every day, but I show up to the page with a degree of joy. Um, at this point in my life, it turns out I actually have a lot.
We have temporarily lost Kimberly. The internet sometimes does that. So we will stay tuned for her to return. And in the meantime, we're going to pause. Okay, well, our internet situation is back up and running. And poor Kimberly, she has to do one of those rewinds for us.
Yeah, I think I remember what I was saying, that it turns out that for an introvert, I actually have quite a lot to say.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've got 60,000 words worth to say, but I'm going to get there somehow, some way. Even if I have to write about my dog, I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, I think pivoting, there's an interesting relationship to risk that the pandemic gave us multiple opportunities to explore our relationship to risk, both physically and professionally. So many people just up and quit their jobs, even if they had them,
Right.
managed to keep them during the pandemic. And it became a, kind of a dance. We're going to wear a mask today. Where are you going? It turns out that my husband I have an ability to take greater risks than my husband does.
Okay.
Some of that is because he's got a heart condition that will do that to a person. But in general, I'll try new foods first. I'll, try interesting places to go on vacation first. My approach to the unknown is a bit more embracing and positive than my husband's.
Right.
And that's okay. He keeps me grounded. And that actually aligns very much with our learning and listening styles. He's primarily a head and a heart listener. I'm primarily a hands listener. So our relationship to risk is very different. So
it's interesting when you say that, because for so many years they used to say opposites attract, and we would say, how can that be? If you don't have the same opinion as mine, we're going to be going head to head. But I do believe it's not that we are totally opposites, but we think, we learn a little differently. And once we become aware of that, that's something that we can and should embrace, because that's the only thing that is going to get us away from those head-to-head confrontations.
Boy, that is so true. And I think what you just spoke of has to do with curiosity. It's like, get curious, not furious.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And sometimes, oh my gosh, particularly now, I think it takes a big effort to get curious and not furious.
Exactly.
Yep. I'm always struck by, particularly now, it seems we're all somewhere in us, we're all kind of spoiling for a fight. And it doesn't take much to get us there, which is pretty scary.
Well, and we see this all over. We see it being depicted in the movies and TV.
Mhm.
So for many of us, we think, well, that's an okay behavior because I'm watching it. But then we go to the grocery store, or, I had one experience the other day. I was coming home from my weekend job and I had my flasher on to get over to the right-hand lane. And this guy was at least a car length behind me. Okay. And as soon as I started to pull over, of course, he had to go faster and he's honking at me. And then he went around on almost the sidewalk, and gave me the gesture. And I thought, wait a second, I've had my flasher on, but as I kept driving on and he made a right turn, I thought, that was his agenda. He had to get angry for whatever reason. And I was his scapegoat. And, I came home and I told that to my husband. He said, I'm so glad that, you didn't give the gesture back or whatever. And I said, look maybe I made a mistake. I don't think I did. I was very intentional in what I was doing. I said, but sometimes somebody around you thinks that they have a right more than you do. And we have to stop arguing about it. It's like, okay, let them go their way. I'll go mine.
Karen, that exact thing happened to me a couple years ago. I'll never forget it. And unfortunately, I was not as calm and collected as you were.
Okay.
Same thing though. I had my blinker on. I made the turn. Oh, he's giving me the finger. He's yelling at me. And I had been having a fabulous day. Very calm. I just got out of yoga class. I was supposed to be, in
Pretty loose.
kind of a glowy mind. It took seconds for me to go from 0 to 90. I parked my car. He was stopped in traffic. I pointed my finger at him. I ripped him a new one. I got really, oh my God, I was furious. And then I went home and told my husband and just burst into tears and cried, and cried and cried and cried because I had, for that moment in time, I had no control, and what if guns had been involved?
Oh,
And
exactly.
this is right. These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. If we can't do what you did, and we did what I did, and there had been a gun involved, someone could have gotten deeply hurt.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's horrifying.
And that's why, I work with another coach and I keep telling her, I know I apologize too much, but it's the society that we live in. I don't want to be attacked for what they assume was my mistake. And so I can't control what they're thinking. All I can do is to stay out of danger is make that apology.
That's
And
right.
that's not what I want to do. It doesn't help my core, as you speak. But those are the times that I have to pivot. It's like, I want to get angry, but if I get angry, I may not get home today.
That's right. That's exactly right. Oh, ooh, just thinking about that incident again, it makes me chilly. It's chills up my spine.
But you learned from it, obviously.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. And now it's, now I know if I take a deep breath and widen my perspective, maybe I scared him when I took that right turn. And maybe that's right. Exactly what you were saying. Maybe that's how he processes fear, is he gets angry. That's very common.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I also like the comment that you made about, there's obviously such a distinct difference between you and your husband. And when people think about that, it's like, well, how can you always be the calm one, Kimberly? How can you? Yeah. Because obviously you don't want to upset him if he has a heart condition. I saw my mother go through this for years.
Yeah.
And what she would do, she'd go to the phone and close the door, and she'd call me or somebody that she could trust.
Yeah.
And she would rip us a new one. And I would say, what did I do wrong? And then she'd call me back like 10 minutes later and she'd say, okay, I'm sorry, but I can't get angry in front of your father because I don't want to give him a heart attack. And I kept saying, your anger is not going to give him a heart attack. Okay.
That's right. That's
but
right.
You do need to temper your anger. So how is that for you and your husband? And then what you bring to, your clients?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I have learned over the years that my husband and I do go head to head, not nearly as often as we used to. But I have learned over the years that there is a gift in those opportunities, those collisions, if you will. And the gift is it forces both he and I to get very clear about what is underneath these strong emotions. And oftentimes they're the source of vulnerability. They're the source of something, we're having an argument about, something stupid, like, who needs to do the dishes today? Just dumb stuff like that. And we're going at it head to head. And then if we can just take a step back and take a deep breath and just say, this is where I'm coming from. I've done the dishes 2 times already today. I am behind on my work. I'm feeling anxious and under pressure. And I would appreciate it if you were the one who did the dishes today. He will come back with what his thing is. I've got an appointment. I've got a client, half an hour. I've got a prep. I'm behind on my prep. So I'm feeling under pressure too. And so how then the question becomes, how can we work out a plan that works for both of us? Well, I get over my little anal compulsiveness about neatness in the house, and we table the whole thing about dishes for an hour, and then we'll do them together, which works for him too. But we would never have gotten there if we hadn't both agreed to take a deep breath and take a step back and speak to what's underneath our feelings. Because we're all only human, right?
Absolutely.
There's validity to the way we feel. If we can only name it and have the other person witness it and validate it for what it is, then we can move on and solve the problem. Right?
And typically we are reactionary. That's what we've been taught for many, many years. At least that's what I was taught.
Yes.
I was that child who always reacted by crying. And half the time my parents didn't even know why I was crying. Okay.
Right.
Was it something my mother said, something my father said, something my brothers did, or something that happened 3 weeks ago that I'm remembering right now?
Right.
And it wasn't until I became a young adult that I started to find my voice. So before the tears came out, I would say, this is what I'm feeling, and this is why. And it would be like, oh, I'm not crying now. What happened? Okay. But my tears, I always thought was my voice. So if you see me crying, you must know. But when you become a young adult and you know more people and you realize I can't read their minds.
That's right.
So how is my family supposed to read mine? And that's when I started cultivating, okay, I have to speak up. But you also have to know when to speak up so that other person actually hears you.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, that can be a tough dance too.
Absolutely.
The coaching program that I've undertaken is called the Positive Intelligence Program. So I'm working on becoming a mindset coach.
Okay.
And one of the things I love about it is that it doesn't take people all the way back to all the awful stuff that happened in their childhood. It's more, how do you better manage your mind and your life moving forward? And so when we come to these collisions or these obstacles in our day, the question we can ask is, what is the gift and opportunity? Now, that's a tough question to ask when you're emotionally reacting, right, to the guy that just flipped you off,
Right.
or the fact that your husband won't do the dishes. That is a very tough question to even entertain. But again, if I can take a deep breath, settle myself, and ask the question, it usually becomes apparent that, like the pandemic, right? This is a chance to pivot into something new. This is a chance to explore something interesting. This is a chance for my husband and I to process our feelings and figure out a plan together to move forward. But until I take that deep breath, acknowledge what I'm feeling, but ask the question, what's the gift and opportunity? I'm not going to be able to move forward.
And isn't it also important for us to be honest with ourselves when we express ourselves to somebody else? So I know for many, many years, I did take that deep breath, but when I was taking that deep breath, what is it that will make Kimberly hear me? And sometimes it really wasn't everything that was deep inside of me that was my biggest obstacle. I kept thinking that you were my obstacle because you needed to listen to me.
That's
okay.
right.
And
right.
so I would turn it around and say something that I knew that you would like to hear, but yet I was still struggling. Okay.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think the pandemic gave us that opportunity to say, okay, nothing is really going to go back to the way it was yesterday.
Right.
So I don't have to go back to those days.
That's
and
right.
if I struggled, if I had this virus in me all these years brewing, I now have that opportunity to get rid of it, or at least temper it until I can feel like, okay, these are the changes I need to make. And I know that my family went through this. Our adult young son was living with us during the pandemic. And it was just about the time that he was thinking he was going to move out. And it was like,
Oh,
and he kept saying, I don't want to be alone if I were to get sick. I understood
yes.
that. I was recovering from knee surgery. So he kept saying, if I were to move, I'd have to keep coming back here to see you because you're not able to drive. And when we actually sat down and talked it all out, we worked out how we could all be in the home at the same time and not get on each other's nerves. And so we all started to change our personalities. Sadly for my husband, he tends to be the one who says, okay, I just won't talk. And so he would find things that really that made him distant from the two of us. My work didn't change. I was still in my studio doing Zoom podcasts and working on, all different things. So to me, my life was going forward. But I also knew I had to be more respectful of the two of them who now were finding themselves in a situation that, they had to redirect their energies. And that's tough.
It is tough. Very hard. I know our daughter who was in her second year in college, had to spend the entire year with us, which was very hard,
I'm sure.
very difficult. And she was also doing a internship, paid internship with a global software company that she could do remotely, but she had to do that plus her classes, plus, you know, she was at home with no friends around, no out. It was just miserable. People that age, I mean, they really suffered.
Oh, they did.
They
Yep.
really, really suffered. But we, similar to your situation, Karen, we learned a lot about negotiating the space, giving each other room to have reactions, to understand that we were all under a lot of stress. Particularly, yes, I would say the two of them. I had my writing to focus on. I was doing art projects in the backyard just for fun.
Yeah.
Just to get me out there and away
Right.
from the computer, you know? So in some ways, I was sort of making the pandemic work for myself as much as I could. But yeah, Rob had a tough time. A lot of his work blew up as well. He was trying to, as we all were, negotiate and figure out how to do his work remotely. Yeah, it was a tough time, tough piece.
And now what I'm seeing from all of it is that we assume that everybody is back to work in their old roles, but obviously the old roles sort of went away. And
Yeah.
we've each, I know for myself, I've taken on some additional roles because I had the time to think about it. Okay. So when we
Yes.
went into pandemic, I was doing my podcasting, not as many as I'm doing right now, which was a whole change. I was doing website design, and that worked during that period of time. But in the last 6 months or so, I've been sitting here thinking, you know what? There's more that I can do. I know there is. And so I started looking at what I called challenges as possible opportunities.
There you
So
go.
instead of saying, I can't do that,
Mhm.
or, Kimberly's already doing it, so why should I do it? I just looked at them and I said, let me see what these opportunities are. Which ones do I like? And having that conversation internally before I shared it outwardly, because I came up with so many things that if I would have just been spitting them out, I think people would have said, yeah, she's never going to do anything going forward.
Right.
And that's what I found interesting about the word pivot, because we think that when we make changes, we just take off the mask and now the changes are made. So tell us what pivoting means to you.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned what's happening right now in terms of people have this yearning to get back to what they consider to be normal, but that's not coming back. And so we are required to pivot. We are required to make choices in our life, just like you described. And one of the things that has come up for me lately is, yes, I have a lot of possibilities on my plate. I'm one of those people that I hear it in what you just described. I usually have too many plates in the air.
Yeah.
I have too many balls going at once. And how many of those balls actually have meaning for me? How many of those balls should be priorities? I know from watching the way my mother went through her life, everything was equally important,
Right.
and it all had to be done all at the same time.
Right.
So I wonder where I got my,
Yeah.
hamster wheel, scatterbrain, squirrel thing. And there was a wonderful article in Maria Shriver's Sunday paper. I don't know, a couple years ago. She described a friend of hers that she walked with on a daily basis, came over one day with a big vase and a bag of marbles. And she went, holy crap, what's going on with this? And he said, Maria, you have limited days left on the planet. Each of these marbles represents a day. This vase represents the container for meaningful days. How many of these marbles are you going to be able to put in that vase because you have had a meaningful day? That sparked me. I started thinking about that because I couldn't really answer the question. And I think for everybody, we would answer it completely differently because we're all individuals.
Right.
But I got intrigued by it. And so I got a big vase that actually I had inherited from my mother, which had symbolic meaning for me. And I got a bunch of marbles together, and I started at the end of each day, I would ask, did I have a meaningful day today? Most of the time it was no, because I'm in the hamster wheel. I'm trying to get shit done.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, I would say, yeah, I've had a meaningful day. Is it the same as a good day? Most of the time, I would say it's not.
Right.
It's a day where I, maybe learned some hard lessons. It's a day where something went, quote unquote, wrong, and I had to pivot in ways that I didn't think I could. And well, what do you know? I just did. It's a day where I had a off the surface, in-depth conversation with somebody. And now we're friends, and now we know each other better. Those sorts of things became the criteria for me to have a meaningful day. And I'm continuing to do this because I was talking to some friends right before we were doing our interview about this exercise, and we're both in adult education. She said that aligns perfectly with the adult learning model between qualitative and quantitative data. The qualitative is you discerning at the end of the day whether this day deserves a meaningful day marble or not. Maybe you can articulate it, maybe you can't. It's qualitative. But the second you put that marble in, it becomes quantitative, because those marbles are things you can count. I just went, oh, that's beautifully aligned.
It is.
And I was so glad that she reminded me of that.
Well, it's like something that I worked at a nonprofit college before I left corporate America, and each orientation they would have that big glass vase, and how much can we put in here?
Yes.
And I would see it every year, and I'd go, yeah.
Yeah.
But it came apparent to me probably about a month or so ago. I mean, like this light just went off, and my son bought me this bullet machine that you can make smoothies. And I'm not a good fruit eater, and I was told by my doctor I had to have so much fruit every day. And so I started making these smoothies, but I found that I couldn't get as much of the fruit in because I was putting in the liquid first.
Oh.
And I'm standing there doing it like 2-3 days in a row, and it's like, it's a watered down smoothie. This is not what I want. So I thought about it. It was like, oh, you put in the big stuff first, and then the fluid and whatever is going to sink around it. And I was like, oh, now this is what I'm supposed to be having. And I then took it from that to say, okay, I'm like you. I get up in the morning, have these great ideas, have an agenda, and then I get on that hamster wheel.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's like, oh, well, I just finished this podcast with Kimberly. So now I got to download it. Then I have to upload it. And then I have, and I'd be sitting at my desk totally confused by the third thing I had to do, even though it was routine. But making this smoothie, all of a sudden it like hit. You know what? You don't have to download and upload at a certain time. You don't promise that it's going to be up within 30 seconds after you record.
That's right.
And so I started thinking about that. Wow. So I can do my recording. Then later in the day, when I'm not recording, I can do the next step. And to me, that was like filling that container either with the marbles or putting all my rock hard stuff in there and then the fluid so I could have a real smoothie.
Oh, I love that analogy.
and-
That's a terrific analogy.
So
Yep.
when we pivot, the way I see it is, it doesn't necessarily mean I make a 90-degree turn or 180. It could be a small fraction of all that,
That's
but
right.
just enough to say, okay, going this way is not working for me. But if I just slowly move it over,
Yeah.
wow.
Have you heard I remember, this reminds me, what you just said reminds me of making a very small adjustment. Like for mariners out at sea, a small adjustment can mean you land in a completely different continent eventually, right?
Got it. Yeah.
Just by a small adjustment. Doesn't take much. That's why, navigation comes down to navigation. In the positive intelligence model, there are 9 saboteurs, which are very interesting. We all have a combination of them.
Right.
But there are also 5 sage powers that he outlines. There is empathy, having empathy for yourself and the person that you are colliding with. Right? We've talked about that, you and I. There's also exploration, getting curious. What's going on underneath this? Why are we both so volatile? Then there's innovation, figuring out a new way forward that will work for both of us. Then there is navigation, which is exactly what you just described. It's like make a small pivot. That's sometimes all it takes. And then there's action, but action happens only before the other 4 have been dug into. And I know for myself, I can get to empathy, I can get to exploration, and sometimes I can get to innovation, but I want to go to action right away. I want to solve the problem, get it over with. Next on the list, right? And I've completely jumped over navigation. I've completely jumped over how meaningful is this? At the end of my life, is this little argument about the dishes really going to matter that much? That one I struggle with for that reason, because I'm hardwired that everything is equally important and must be done all at once, all the time.
It's very interesting because my youngest son just took on a new job, and he's the person who is supposed to be training him has a lot of my old tendencies, and my old tendencies were exactly what you're talking about. Got to take action. This has to be done.
Right.
And I always thought I was successful at it, but I now realize how much time and energy and grief I went through. But he calls every day and he'll say, Mom, you learned. Why isn't she learning? I said, well, number one, she's not at that point. Okay. To her, what she's doing is right. I said, you know what made me change? And he goes, what? And I said, you identified I was depressed. And as soon as you identified that, and I said, oh, if he knows that, then I better do something about it. And it was taking care of my health and starting from mental health, not even worrying about physical. I got to take care of my mental health, because if I can do that, then I will be taking care of my physical health and emotional. And so I said, it took somebody to guide me, to shake me up a little bit and say, this is what I see. And I said, but so many of us, we don't see it.
That's right.
You know, we see being on that hamster wheel and ticking off all these things all day long. I now have a reason to be exhausted because I worked hard. And I remember saying that to my husband. I was on medical leave for about 14 weeks. And when I was on medical leave, I really was not allowed to do anything. I mean, I could go do the dishes. That was about it. I couldn't push a vacuum cleaner. I couldn't lift my laundry. And at the end of the day, when he came home from work and he said he was tired, I said, he earned it.
Yeah.
What did I earn to be tired? Because I sat on a chair all day. And I thought about it once I started healing and I could get up and around. And it's like, it's not about comparison.
Right.
That's what we do. Okay.
Now, can't help ourselves. We can't help ourselves.
So if your husband thinks that he's busier than you are, well then why should he do the dishes? And if you think you're busier than him, then why should it fall to you? And again, it takes that little bit of conversation to say, okay, we both know the dishes have to get done. How can it happen? And to all of the listeners out there, this isn't perfect. So it doesn't mean that you can negotiate today and it works and you remember it, because I guarantee you tomorrow, next week, it's going to happen again. But it's like you said, pivoting and negotiating.
That's right. That's right. And ultimately, we both got so tired of arguing about who does the dishes that we decided, unless somebody takes the time to make a really good meal, then the other person does the dishes. But throughout the day, just do the dishes you dirtied, right? Everybody do that. And when my daughter was home, we told her that was the new rule. Do the dishes you dirty. That way nobody has to face a big pile of them. And that worked pretty well. But it took us a lot of collisions to get there.
Well, life has a lot of collisions.
Right. That's right.
So how can our listeners find you? Because you are a coach. And one of the things that I am doing at this point of my life, after meeting so many of you through Podmatch and finding, not all, you all may refer to the same subject matters, but you all come about it differently. And so for those of us who are looking for a coach, sometimes we don't even know where to go. Sometimes we don't even know if we want to go to a coach. And so sometime this week will be up on our website, but I'm going to become, and I think I'm the first one ever, which is called a coach advocate. And so for our listeners, and you're saying, I listened to that podcast with Kimberly Dakin, and, I'm thinking that I need a coach. And so I have sat down with a number of life coaches, and I have a series of questions. And when people are contacting me, I'm now referring them to my people in my database, because you don't have to do it in person. You can do it on Zoom or FaceTime. In fact, I connected 2 people last week, and the coach happens to be in Australia. And,
That's great.
but the connection was perfect. They both,
Nice.
on the consultation appointment, they actually texted me and said, "How did you know?" I said,
No.
I said, "I wasn't positive, but just knowing enough about each of you, I made the recommendation. And if it works, that's great. If it doesn't, I have a whole database of people."
There you
And
go.
I just believe in coaching so much because you guide us. You don't tell us what to change. You make
That's
us
right.
you make us talk about it.
That's right.
And I'll tell you, I've been in therapy and I can talk my ear off, and then I'll see the therapist look at her watch and go, "Time's up."
Right.
Oh, I did all the talking. What am I supposed to do next?
That's right. That's right. Well, yeah. People can get a hold of me on my website, kimdakin.com. That's KYM, D as in David, AKIN as in Nancy.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. And when the book comes out in October, it's going to be published under Routledge Publishing. And the name of it, still going back and forth a little bit. Publisher wants to call it Using the Head, Hands, and Heart Listening Model in Coach Practice. I think that's too long and clunky, but for now, that's the name of the book.
Well, we'll have to have you back on when the book comes out so we can talk about the book in depth, and we can put it out there so individuals will go out and buy it. I want our listeners to know Kimberly will not get rich selling her book, because most authors do not.
That's
but
right.
If you can find that guidance and hold on to it, we're never too old to make the changes to make us feel much more valuable to ourselves, let alone.
That's exactly right. Oh, one more thing.
Sure.
On my website, I've got a link where you can take the positive intelligence assessment. You can find out what saboteurs are operating in you that are messing things up for you. It's a fun 5 minutes.
Well,
so
I will tell people that I took the longer version of that last week. And I could have told you what my number one was going to be. And even though I worked so hard to change, it's in me. And my number one is people pleaser. And it has almost destroyed my business and my marriage. But I'm working on it. So
I have a number of clients who are pleasers. My number one, again, no matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, my number one is restless, right? Squirrel. Okay. So, but we all have them. And what I love about the mindset coach model is that these are all strengths. Your capacity to please people and be tuned in with them is obviously a strength that you use in your podcasting.
Right.
My restless is a strength that I use in taking risks and finding new opportunities and exploring new topics and making new pivots. So
I love it. Well, again, we'll have all this information in the show notes. So for those of you who are either listening to an audio stream or watching this on YouTube, check the show notes, because we will have Kimberly's website there. And when her book comes out, we'll have a link for the book. So keep listening. And Kimberly, have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. It's already been a meaningful day for me.
Wonderful. Another marble. Have a good one.